Hi everyone. Today I want to share a book I finished reading this weekend. It's Good Reasonable People. Its subtitle is The Psychology Behind America's Dangerous Divide. I'm gonna do today's review in English because, first of all, this book is about politics and there may be some concepts that I don't feel 100% comfortable. I can translate them precisely into Chinese. And second, there might be some words, for example, government, politics, divide, or party, that may trigger censorship if I do it in Chinese. Right, now let's dig into it. First of all, I think this is one of the best books, in my personal opinion, in analyzing why the politics in the US have become so polarized. The reason I say it's one of the best is because if you remember, I'm obsessed with brain, neuroscience, psychology. So in this book, the author analyzed polarized politics from psychology, from human brain perspective. My biggest takeaway from reading this book is, as human being, we have two identities. First, group identity, and second, individual identity. And surprisingly, or I should really say not surprisingly at all, at least to myself, these two identities don't necessarily reconcile with each other. And in reality, they sometimes may conflict with each other all the time. There have been numerous examples in history about the conflict of two identities. For example, I've read a lot of books about Nazis. Very often we would assume that the Nazis officer, the cold-blooded murderers, were born that way. But when reading the stories about these cold-blooded murderers, we find it surprising that these people are just as normal as we are. They can be loving husbands, and they can even be the friendly neighbors we say hi every morning. And that is their true personal identity. But when it comes to committing crime, the brain switched to the group identity mode. Under this mode, killing Jews, murdering people, is not considered a crime. It's considered being loyal to my in-group. It's considered fulfilling the responsibility for my in-group people. Another example I can think of is I have always been puzzled why a seemingly caring, loving father who has a daughter he cares so much about can vote against the abortion rights of women. This would kind of explain why, although not explicitly. So the father who's so caring, who's so committed to raising his daughter to be a strong woman, and a guy who fiercely attack women's right to decide what happened to their bodies, they can be the same person. It's not considered conflicting by our brain because we're talking about group identity and individual identity. As a loving father, this is when we're talking about our individual identity. This person truly believes his beloved daughter should have access to healthcare resources and should have every right to make a health decision she thinks best for her. But as a Republican, this is the same person we're talking about. Now we're talking about switching to group identity. This same person can wholeheartedly vote for the group's decision to ban abortion rights. Because now we're talking about we, the Republican, being the good, reasonable people. We are good, reasonable people. And anyone outside of our group, they are not good, reasonable people. And because they are not good, reasonable people, they don't respect traditional value. They don't respect family value. They don't respect baby's life. Because they are not good, reasonable people as we are, whatever those Democrats believe, we want to prove they are wrong. My second biggest takeaway is not something new from reading this book. If you have read the book The Science of Evil or any other psychology books explaining why ordinary people can commit hate crime, you are probably already very familiar with the concept of in-group versus out-group. Unfortunately, no matter how often do we talk about inclusion, talking about diversity nowadays, our brain remains to be the same old brain. We're so good at creating in-group versus out-group based on sometimes really superficial or meaningless texts. There have been numerous experiments or studies in adults, in teenagers. In these studies, people are assigned to random groups. And there's not even a rationale or methodology why people are selected in one group, not the other. But immediately, people are treating in-group people versus out-group people differently. So whenever we reinforce the group text, for example, Republican versus Democrats, or Asian versus non-Asian, or white versus colored. Unfortunately, our brain almost spontaneously starts to create in-group versus out-group. Or another way to better explain this is we are just so good as human beings to adjust ourselves, adjust our individual belief at that moment to fit into the group identity. So group identity overrates individual identity. At the end of this book, the author mentioned to break down the polarization, the only way is to treat people as individuals, not how we treat them in groups. This reminds me of a totally separate, different topic. In today's corporate American world, we have been so intentionally creating different tags, for example, different ethnicity, different races, different backgrounds, to showcase we are truly diverse, to showcase we are DEI. But by overutilizing this different tags to show how diverse, how inclusive we are, we run into the risk of prompting our brains to create in-group and out-groups. And I personally believe there's no way to beat our brain. And I believe the true inclusion is not about how many diversity boxes you check. It's about going back to the individuals and finding common grounds. Alright, a very long video, but I really enjoy reading this book, and I would recommend this book, Good Reasonable People, to anyone who's puzzled by the polarized politics in the US. Alright, see ya!